Welcome to Executive Leaders Radio, your spot in the corner office, the radio show where executives share their secrets to success. Executive Leaders Radio.
You're listening to Executive Leaders Radio, broadcast from the offices of Life Sciences, Pennsylvania. This is your host, Herb Cohen, with my co-hosts, Chris Molyneux, Life Sciences, PA, Peter Snelling, Merlin, Jeff Mack, and Shannon Lane, Newmark Knight, Frank, Drew Hanlon, Creative, and Steve Ray. Jeffrey, can you give us a rundown on who we have on the air today, please?
Yes, and I'd first like to thank Chris for hosting us today. We have Sue Dillon, co-founder, president, and CEO of Arrow Biotherapeutics, Joe Truitt, president and CEO of Achillion Pharmaceuticals, Greg Wujak is the CEO of Castle Creek Pharma, and Steve Tolman, managing member of An Exception.
Let's get to know our first guest, Sue Dillon, co-founder, president, and CEO of Arrow Biotherapeutics. Sue, what is Biotherapeutics? What are you guys doing?
So Arrow is a startup biotech in Philadelphia, and we're developing new medicines for cancer and immune diseases.
All righty, and tell us a little bit about where you're from originally.
Originally, I'm from Long Island, New York.
How many brothers and sisters?
I have one younger sister.
And what was going on with you in your childhood? What were some significant things occurring?
Well, I guess I had a pretty normal childhood. One of the most significant things, though, that I do remember is that my dad got sick.
How young were you when Dad got sick?
I think I was about in third or fourth grade.
And what was he sick from, and what did it do to him?
So my dad had a disease called, at the time it was called ileitis. Today it's known as Crohn's disease. And, basically it impaired his ability to work. He was a traveling salesman. He was a very young man, maybe 30 or so.
How'd that make you feel?
Frightened and
I can understand
confused
that.
Sometimes.
Makes sense. Yeah. Jeffrey?
So tell us about Mom and Dad. What was Mom's influence on you growing up and today?
So my mom is the most determined person I know. She had to really pitch in and kind of take over the family life as well as financial.
So I'm just curious, you grew up, your dad got sick at a young age, and I'm just curious, how did you deal with that? Like, what were your outlets, or what did you do to kind of distract your mind from that time?
The truth is that I really don't remember much about what I did to cope with it. I think the way I coped with it was that I didn't think about it too much and just went about my daily life.
Yeah. Shannon?
So earlier in the green room, you mentioned there were nights when your mom would take you over to the neighbor's house and then take your father to the hospital. What do you remember from those nights?
Oh, I remember that it was late, it was dark, it was scary. I knew Dad was in pain, and I looked forward to seeing Mom again when she came home and, letting us know what was going on with him.
Yeah, it must have been pretty frightening. Stephen?
Sue, the sense I get is that independence was a pretty strong driver for you as you were growing up. Could you expand on that?
Well, I think that really when I was in college, it became clear to me that one of the biggest, most important features for me was to be financially independent and to be able to find something to do that I really liked doing. And ultimately, that's how I found my way into the career that I pursued in science.
Chris?
Yeah, Sue, before founding Arrow, you worked on the two world-leading drugs for Crohn's disease. Can we all assume it's because of your childhood experience with your father's illness?
I mean, the truth is that there really was not a connection there. I became the head of the immunology group at Centocor and then Janssen, and we had a large portfolio of work that dealt with autoimmune disease. But I will say that the connection that I had to Crohn's disease from my dad's experience and also speaking to many, many other patients was a huge driver.
So you were a scientist at heart, is that right?
Yes. Mm-hmm. I was a late bloomer scientist.
What do you mean a late bloomer scientist? Were you interested in science your whole life because of your father's condition?
No, I really was not. When I was in grade school, even the first few years of college, I was very interested in political science and history, no interest in science per se. And it was only really after 2 years of college and sort of being forced by the college to pick a major that I realized that, if I went into science, I could probably have a good job. And that's what led me into it to begin with.
Yeah, you talked about the influence of your mom and dad, and your mother didn't push you into science, or your dad wasn't putting that expectation on you?
No, my parents were very determined that I would get a college degree, and I think they were interested and had encouraged me to become a teacher. But when I got to college, I realized that I really wasn't at all interested in teaching or, frankly, in any of the liberal arts enough to pursue that for a degree. And I discovered science almost serendipitously. And through that and my very first course that I took in immunology, finally found what I pursued for the rest of my life, which is the science of immunology, which I love, and that has led me to the career that I've had.
Your nature is to really put your head down and focus and make things happen, isn't it? It's to get through stuff. It's to make things happen.
I would say yes. Yeah.
As a little girl, did you think you were going to turn out like this?
No.
What was expected of you as a little girl?
Well, the usual, that I would do well in school, that I would be kind to people and behave.
As opposed to taking your destiny in your own hands? Some of that frightening stuff that happened as a kid?
I wouldn't say as opposed to. I think it's just a question of what's on the radar. I think when I was young, what was on the radar was, number one, you're going to get a college degree. Mm-hmm. Number two, it will be in a profession where you can contribute something and at the same time be financially independent, at least have a good financial income.
You worked for a large organization prior to starting your own business, didn't you?
Yes, I worked for several.
Wasn't that awfully frightening?
No.
What do you mean, no?
I found it exhilarating, actually. It was a wonderful experience. I spent...
so you've got guts. Yeah. You've got courage.
I would say I'm a determined person.
I would say so, Peter.
Yeah.
Sue, not so many years ago, people thought that immunological diseases were mysterious or even imaginary, misdiagnosed. How did your father's illness affect your empathy toward the sufferers?
Yeah, I think that what you say is true, and it's almost it's actually true today to an extent. It affected me because I was able to see firsthand how much suffering there actually is, and how little was available at the time, and there were a few drugs, but they didn't work very well. Side effects were terrible.
Mm-hmm. Jeffrey?
Sue, we're at Life Sciences PA today with Chris. How do you? What's your perspective on Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, and the life sciences community from a talent and hiring perspective?
I have to tell you that I'm really happy that I made the decision to stay in Philadelphia for this next leg of my career. We are actually downtown in a fantastic startup incubator. There are lots of startups that have come out of either Penn, other universities, or big pharma. The scientific talent is fantastic, and there's a real nucleus in Philadelphia of companies that are doing leading-edge work.
Well, what's the benefit of Life Sciences Pennsylvania in terms of this community?
Well, I think that when you're a CEO, particularly of a small company, you have to build a phenomenal network, or you're not going to survive. You know, my company right now, we only have 12 people, and we do a lot, but obviously we depend upon a very large network in order to get the work done that we need to get done. And PA Life Sciences is a tremendous catalyst for that.
Mm-hmm. What does the name Arrow mean?
So we chose the word arrow because what we're focused on is a new type of medicine that is aimed at developing tissue-targeted therapeutics. So typically when you take a drug, that drug sort of goes every place in the body and it finds the disease target that it's looking for, but it's going every place. Our technology allows us to specifically target the diseased tissue and deliver an active drug in that spot. So we think by doing this, we will have better efficacy as well as better safety, and that would really be a home run.
So what's the website address for this organization known as Biotherapeutics?
It's
Arrow Biotherapeutics.
Right, AROBIOTX.com.
Let me have that one more time.
AROBIOTX.com.
We've been speaking with Sue Dillon, co-founder, president, and CEO of Arrow Biotherapeutics here on Executive Leaders Radio. Don't forget to visit our website, executiveleadersradio.com, to learn more about our executive leaders. Back in a moment, right after this break. Want help building your business with help from this show's CEOs? Our CEOs can help you uncover more opportunities, grow your sales, connect you, help you raise money, all the big issues. Because our CEOs have been there and done that. They've succeeded in creating millions of jobs and earning millions of dollars. And some are available to advise you. Now, email mentors@executiveleadersradio.com. That's mentors@executiveleadersradio.com. The same CEOs you've heard on this show for 10 years may be willing to help you build your business, uncover new opportunities, grow your sales, connect you, help you raise money, all the big issues, because our CEOs have been there and done that, succeeding in creating millions of jobs and earning millions of dollars. And some are available to advise you. Now, email mentors@executiveleadersradio.com. That's mentors@executiveleadersradio.com. We're back. You're listening to Executive Leaders Radio. This is your host, Herb Cohen. We'd like to introduce Joe Truitt, President and CEO of Cahill Pharmaceuticals. Joe, what is Cahill Pharmaceuticals? What are you guys doing?
Yeah, so we're a development stage pharmaceutical company working in the rare disease area in diseases of the kidney and diseases of hematology.
And how large or how small is this team?
So we have approximately 70 employees.
Mm-hmm. And you guys are a public company as well, aren't you?
That's correct. We're a publicly traded company traded on the NASDAQ.
What's the trading symbol?
ACHN.
Where are you from originally?
I'm originally from a row house neighborhood in Philadelphia.
This is a working class, blue-collar neighborhood in Philadelphia called Kensington. And how many brothers and sisters?
I have one brother and one sister.
And you're the oldest of three, right?
Yes.
All right. What was going on with you 8 to 14 years old? Actually, you told us earlier that Mom and Dad got divorced when you were 5.
Yeah, that's correct. So Mom and Dad were divorced. I lived with Mom in Kensington.
And what was going on with the factories and stuff like that?
Yeah, so Kensington was an old school factory neighborhood. Most of the people walked to work. And unfortunately, at that time in the 70s, there was a major transition going on in the economy, and major companies like Philco Ford, which was the big employer in our neighborhood, went out of business and threw a lot of people out of work very rapidly. So there was a lot of uncertainty and anxiety.
Wait a minute. How old were you when this was going on?
I was probably 7, 8, 9.
And you remember this, huh?
Of course.
What did it do to you?
It just made me very anxious and always nervous about wanting to make sure that I had financial resources.
You think this is one of the reasons you're involved as a CEO with a public company? Because you're so driven?
Yeah, I would say I wouldn't say that's exactly right, how I became a CEO of a public company, but it certainly taught me that I needed to go out and work and take control of things.
Jeffrey?
So, Joe, tell us about your first job. How young were you when you started making money, and what was your first job?
Yeah, my first job was bagging groceries at the local supermarket, and in that neighborhood, because everybody walked, not only did you have to bag the groceries, but you could carry them home for people at $0.25 a bag.
For what kind of people?
For older people. Older, at that point, mostly only women did shopping, and they needed help getting their groceries home. So
what did you learn from that experience?
Well, I learned to not be afraid to approach people and ask them if they would like to have their groceries bagged, and I was learned to stick my hand out for a tip.
All right, Chris?
Yeah, Joe, so your parents are split up, the factories in the neighborhood are closing, a lot of job loss. It's the early 70s. Was there anyone in particular who you really looked up to and admired in that kind of a surrounding?
Yeah, and so in in our family, we had a large family. Grandmom and Grandpop were kind of the stable centers of our universe.
And you also ended up a little bit later in your life joining the Marines. What led you to take that path? And what has that led you to?
Yeah, so my uncle, my dad's oldest brother, came home from the Marines, and I remember that in the 1960s, and I always remember how much of a big deal it was and what a great guy he was. And so when I had the opportunity after college to join the Marine Corps officer program, I jumped right in because it seemed like the Truett thing to do. And that ended up leading me to the biotech industry because when I got out of the Marines, I was hired by a gentleman named Hank Petruzak, who was running a company called TAP Pharmaceuticals. And Hank wanted former military people to work for his company, and so it was an easy transition because I certainly wasn't qualified on the science side.
Gotcha. So the Marines got you involved in the world that you're involved with nowadays. Shannon?
Joe, in the green room, you mentioned your father was a mentor.
Yep.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. Because of the divorce, it was an unusual circumstance. My father would take myself and my brother every Wednesday out to a diner for dinner, and then we went to the library up in Northeast Philadelphia. My father's an English teacher and has a passion for that, and he basically taught us how to navigate the library and read and appreciate literature.
What impact did that have on you?
I think it taught me that your lifelong learning and having a passion for education and reading is really important.
And what does that have to do with what you're doing nowadays?
Well, in our business, we do a lot of reading, a lot of understanding, and it's really important to have those skills. It's not just the science skills, but it's also the communication skills and the ability to read.
Joe, you came from a relatively tight-knit neighborhood. How has that sense of community carried on through your life?
Yeah, so I've always been kind of proud of whatever I was doing and whatever organizations I happened to be involved with. When I was a kid, I was proud to be from the schoolyard that we were from. And as I moved on to college and high school, I was always really proud of those institutions. And then, of course, the companies I worked for and of course, the Marine Corps, which has its own culture. And now in my own company, I couldn't be prouder of the work that my people do and the kind of organization that we've become.
Drew?
Joe, when you describe your childhood, I can actually feel the anxiety from the factories closing and your parents' situation. I'm just curious, how did you deal with those tough times as a kid?
Yeah, we spent a lot of time outside in the schoolyards because our houses were very small and they weren't air conditioned.
And what was your role in your friend's set?
So I was kind of the guy in the neighborhood that got the guys together, organized the pickup basketball games and kind of the pickup baseball games because we had so many kids, and that was a typical day that went on for years.
And what did you learn during those times that you bring to work every day with you?
That there's lots of different personalities and they have to be managed and cajoled and encouraged, but we did okay.
Peter?
How does being the first or being a Marine and maybe the first into a battle relate to what you're doing now with rare disease research?
Yeah, I think what the Marine Corps taught me was really leadership. I had the great opportunity to be a Marine officer, and they drilled into us that you lead from the front, you set the example, you do what your people do. So the fact that we get to lead towards a mission of curing these very devastating diseases is just, it's an unbelievable opportunity. And it's not hard to be a leader in an organization like I work with because everybody's so passionate.
Joe, what is the name Achillean? How does it define the company?
Yeah, so we, Achilleum is a great warrior, as you know, and we consider ourselves warriors on behalf of our patients and our shareholders and all the constituencies that we serve. So we do have that spirit.
Yeah, you brought a team member along with you today, Suzanne Heinzinger. I'd like to ask her a question. Suzanne, what's it like working with Joe, and what kind of a CEO is he?
Joe is a very passionate CEO in everything that he does. In every task that he takes on, to finding additional office space in the Philadelphia area, to understanding patient experiences and discussing science. So that passion rubs off on our company.
What's your role in the company, Suzanne?
I am the Senior Vice President of Corporate Communications.
So what's that mean? What are you supposed to be doing there?
I represent Achilleon and all of our external communications.
So you're supposed to know everything that's going on in the organization and be able to communicate it out, right?
Yes.
So you got a pretty close relationship with your CEO, don't you?
Yes.
What's he really concerned about?
Joe's concerned about really bringing good therapies to patients. There are a lot of unmet needs in the two disease states that we're focusing on, and bringing therapies for patients where there are no therapies available. He's very passionate about.
Where in your childhood do you think this emanates from?
I think I just, growing up in the neighborhood I grew up in, you always kind of cheer for the underdog. And I have to tell you, there's nobody that's more of an underdog than someone who's afflicted by the conditions that we work on. If you don't have empathy, I don't know. It's not hard to do.
So Kensington in Philadelphia is known as a pretty tough neighborhood. It was especially back in those times. And I'm trying to figure out what did you bring from the street that's helping you build the business?
Yeah, I think it's just a toughness. There's no job that we can't, no challenge that we can't overcome. There's nothing that can't be achieved if you put your mind to it and you stick with it. And that's what you learned on those streets.
And you think the Marines helped shape you for your gig, huh?
Yeah, I think the Marines refined my leadership style. Mm-hmm. I wasn't, some kind of a special trained leader before that.
What was the effect of your grandparents or your grandmom? What was that again?
Yeah, so my grandparents were just the center of our universe, the stability. They were very supportive of anything that any of us wanted to do, and they were just fantastic people.
What did you learn from your grandparents that you bring to building this public company every day?
Yeah, well, my grandmother was a very religious person, and she always was focused on the underdog, and so I think that just permeates our whole family.
It sounds like that's what is happening with the business, too. What's the website address for this, Achillion Pharmaceuticals?
ACHILLION.com.
Let me have that one more time.
ACHILLION.com.
We've been speaking with Joe Truitt, President and CEO of Achillion Pharmaceuticals, here on Executive Leaders Radio. Don't forget to visit our website. It's executiveleadersradio.com. That's executiveleadersradio.com to learn more about our executive leaders. We'll be back in a moment, right after this break. We're back. You're listening to Executive Leaders Radio. This is your host, Herb Cohen. We'd like to introduce Greg Wujak, CEO of Castle Creek Pharma. Greg, what is Castle Creek Pharma? What are you guys doing?
Castle Creek Pharma is a rare orphan disease company focused on rare dermatological conditions.
How large or how small is this firm?
We're about 23 strong.
All right. Where are you from originally?
I'm from the south side of Chicago.
And how many brothers and sisters?
I have neither. I am an only child.
What makes an only child special?
Growing up, both my parents grew up in a depression, so I got no breaks, so there was nothing really special about being an only child other than I had to do everything for myself.
So you had to work for it. How young were you when you started making money?
Probably about 7 years of age.
What'd you do?
We lived down from a very large hospital that had a great volume of staff and patients. I set up a lemonade stand, and that was my first taste of entrepreneurial.
Whose idea was that?
Actually, it was my mother's, believe it or not.
What was your mother's influence on that lemon? Did she tell you where to set it up?
She was a perfectionist. She gave me all sorts of direction, but at that point in time, once things really started to take off, I think the selling side came out on myself.
Yeah, but your mother understood about traffic patterns and marketing or something here. She told you to sit. Sounds like it was a great location. What was the next step in your making money career?
We moved from the city to a really small town outside of Chicago, and I had an opportunity to work on an onion farm.
An onion farm? How young were you then?
About 12 years of age.
And what were you doing, and what did you do different than all the other kids?
We had the opportunity to pick onions for a quarter a bushel.
And what did you do different than the other kids?
I made it a point to work faster than anybody else because there were only so many rows, so the more rows you had, the more opportunity of making money.
Chris?
Yeah, Greg, in the green room, it sounded like you really made an effort in school to look out for kids who might not have been included with the other kids, sort of the outcasts. Can you describe that a little bit?
Sure. Growing up in the city, we had a large influx of immigrant children coming into the school, in particular some kids from Philippines, some from Serbia, and so forth, and they were outcasts because they couldn't openly communicate with a lot of the other children. So I kind of stepped up and took them under my wing and kind of carried them through and got them acclimated.
So an only child, you're helping out the kids who really are almost left out in the cold otherwise, and now you're running a company looking into orphan diseases, addressing orphan diseases, which for our listeners are diseases with a patient population of 200,000 or fewer. So these are also unmet needs in small populations. Do you think there's a connection?
You know, when you phrase it that way, I think there really is, because the disease we're focused on is basically called the worst disease no one's ever heard of. So there's not been any representation of this patient population up until now. And now you're seeing a greater influx of companies like ourselves focusing on this area, but I don't think they've had the representation, and I'm kind of proud to be able to represent this community.
So you've been looking out for the little guy your whole life, it sounds like.
More or less, yes.
Greg, why you? I mean, why did you help these kids in high school? Like, what made you do that?
You know, growing up, I was the youngest kid in our neighborhood, and I always, you know, I realized how hard it was to get acclimated and push yourself into a group. And maybe perhaps I just didn't want them to kind of go through the same thing that I had to endure.
How did it make you feel to help those kids?
Very rewarding. Very, very rewarding.
And how has that transferred, like helping those kids over to what you do today?
It's the same thing. If you saw the faces on the children and the parents and from our latest trial that we're treating and having the results that we're having, it's extremely rewarding. And it motivates, and it's very contagious to all the employees within the organization.
Greg, when you're dealing with rare diseases, it, by its very nature, means that someone else hasn't stepped up. Throughout this conversation, you've talked about how you've stepped up throughout your life. So being a self-starter, how is that playing out in what you do every day?
We're just from not only stepping up where we're focused on right now, we've also branched out and increased our footprint in the space to broaden our scope to even to appeal to a larger group within the same space. So that rare disease space has different segments to it. Where we were focused on one segment, we're now focused on 3 different segments.
Shannon?
Greg, in the green room earlier, you mentioned you played a number of sports growing up. Which one was your favorite?
Hockey.
Why?
I have a very aggressive behavior, and this was a great place for me to take out that aggressive behavior.
Mm-hmm. And what lessons did you learn from playing hockey that you bring with you today?
I love the challenge. So we were somewhat of an underdog team. We didn't have a lot of the things that were provided some of the other teams, so we always had to step up and play harder, and I think that's what kind of drove us to be as good as we were.
And maybe that's one of the reasons you keep on expanding the business and going into other kinds of drugs. Jeff?
Greg, you're a creative guy. You're also an artist. You learned an important life lesson from your dad at one of your first creative paintings. Can you tell us what you learned from him?
Sure, I did. It's one of those things that's kind of tattooed on your brain. I think it was 2nd grade, I had drawn for class. I believe it was a bird or a parrot, and when I brought it home to share it with my father because I was so proud of it, he proceeded to tell me that I was lying and that I shouldn't lie, that there's no way that I could have drawn something that well. And so he challenged me at that point in time, being as nervous as I was, to draw it again. And I, of course, couldn't. But down the line, I ended up drawing some other things to demonstrate. And from that, I ended up developing a real significant love for art and painting and watercolors and everything else.
And an honesty standard.
And an honesty standard, yes.
So what's that creativity? What's that have to do with building this life science company?
You know, when you start to look at the business that we're in and the complexities of getting a product to market, you have to be extremely creative, and you're going to run into obstacles along the way. And if you don't think outside the box to be creative on how to get those products to market, not only certainly there's a straight set of rules from the FDA, but once you get beyond that and get the product approved, the complexities of getting the product out to the patients is extremely complex.
Greg, so you grew up in a tough neighborhood. You played tough sports. What did growing up in that neighborhood teach teach you about survival that carries through into what you're doing today?
Again, being the youngest, it was survival of the fittest. It told me, number one, never back down. Secondarily, never give up. Continue to push myself. I think I got a lot of that also, the push from my father, because every time that I came home and maybe I was crying or what have you, and some of the kids picked on me, my father would say, you know what, step up and go ahead and own it yourself and make something of it. And I think from that, maybe it was just the repeat of it, kind of gave me a sense of being driven.
What gave you a sense of being driven?
Being repeatedly knocked down because I was constantly challenged by the kids in the neighborhood. So we played a lot of sports, and since they were older and much larger, and quite honestly a lot better than I was, I always had to constantly step up my game to be accepted within the group.
And what's that have to do with this business?
Same thing. You're in a very, very competitive area. You have a lot of demands upon you, and you've got to step up to the challenge. And so I guess when you kind of phrase it that way, I look at it as a constant challenge of something that I've done before, and I understand on how to step up.
What role did your mom play in your life? And how's your mom affecting your business career nowadays?
My mother was a perfectionist. She always demanded from me to, number one, she was a numbers person, so I had to memorize all my multiplication tables, everything. So to this day, every time when we're out, I can do math in my head very, very well. But at the same time, that perfectionist has actually extended into our business. So whenever we're having to step up to the plate and there's something that's being required of us as a group, more recently we had just completed a phase 2 study. We had a very significant task to get all the required paperwork to file for our end of phase 2 meeting request with the FDA. Everyone followed my lead, and it was a contagious behavior that everyone stepped up to the plate and got it done in time.
What did you learn from being the youngest that's helping you build this business?
That's a really good question. I think part of it is just the constant challenge. We talked about being an underdog, so to speak. And quite honestly, in the rare disease, you are an underdog because you're really pioneering on behalf of all these patients.
Let me ask you, what's the website address for this organization known as Castle Creek Pharma?
This is a mouthful. CastleCreekPharma.com. So CastleCreek Pharma.com.
We've been speaking with Gray Rujak, CEO of Castle Creek Pharma, here on Executive Leaders Radio. Back in a moment right after this break. Want help building your business with help from this show's CEOs? Our CEOs can help you uncover more opportunities, grow your sales, connect you, help you raise money, all the big issues. Because our CEOs have been there and done that. They've succeeded in creating millions of jobs and earning millions of dollars. And some are available to advise you. Now, email mentors@executiveleadersradio.com. That's mentors@executiveleadersradio.com. The same CEOs you've heard on the show for 10 years may be willing to help you build your business, uncover new opportunities, grow your sales, connect you, help you raise money, all the big issues, because our CEOs have been there and done that, succeeding in creating millions of jobs and earning millions of dollars. And some are available to advise you. Now, email mentors@executiveleadersradio.com. That's mentors@executiveleadersradio.com. We're back. You're listening to Executive Leaders Radio. This is your host, Herb Cohen. We'd like to introduce Steve Tolman, managing member of Nexception. Steve, what is Nexception? And you're also chairman of the board of Life Sciences PA. What is Nexception?
It builds biotech companies.
It builds biotech companies. So you're not looking to do just one company. You're looking to build a series?
Yeah, when we see opportunities, we go after them and we build teams and capital around them to move forward, and that's what's happened for the last 14 years.
Oh, okay. And where are you from originally?
A little bit of a story. Born in Berg, Germany, then moved to Spain, and then to Napa Valley, California, then to Hawaii, where I was in kindergarten. I remember that. Then to Naples, Italy, Parco Lazzuto, and then to Cherry Hill, New Jersey.
Wait a minute. So you moved around a lot as a kid. How many brothers and sisters do you have?
I'm the youngest of 3.
So you're the youngest of 3. You moved around a lot as a kid. That must be pretty terrifying, moving into these new communities and having to find new friends and feeling bad about yourself and stuff like that.
I mean, maybe some people might see it that way, but I always looked at it as an adventure, and the opportunity to meet new people, make new friends was fun. I enjoyed it.
Oh, okay. Chris?
Hey, Steve, you've mentioned opportunity twice already, and the importance of seizing opportunity. You've also talked about managing your resources, and you had a great childhood story involving an ice pop, I think, about managing resources.
Well, my mother reminds me that very early on, probably the age of 7, when we would go to the swim club, there would be a snack stand, and I would go for my ice pop. And why I picked the ice pop, my brother and sister would always buy the vanilla ice cream pop, and that would cost 45,000 lira. We only had 50,000 lira for allowance. The ice pop was 15,000 lira. I could get 3 for one or the other. So to me, it meant that the resource was valuable, and I just felt I would use it wisely.
Yes, so a lot of opportunities, a lot of managing resources. You mentioned 6 different cities that you lived in. You also are known for the 6 different company exits you've made. Is there a correlation between bouncing around from city to city, bouncing from company to company?
I'm not sure I can draw a correlation between the two. There may be a coincidence, but I think for me, moving around as a child made me look at things. It gave me ability to see and listen carefully and see opportunity. The 6 companies may come from that.
Stephen, we understand that you're a serial entrepreneur and that you moved around a lot as a kid, but you also mentioned in the green room that when you were about 10 years old, you knew you wanted a family. Tell us a little bit about that vision, because that's a little strange for a 10-year-old kid to be thinking, I think.
Maybe it was just that I enjoyed my own family unit, and I just felt that someday I would mimic my parents, and I thought that was part of life that I would enjoy and wanted to have.
What's that have to do with you launching this business that launches businesses, the fact that you knew at the age of 10 you wanted to have kids?
Well, when you put it that way, maybe it's sort of a family of businesses. I have had I respect people for who they are and their capabilities, and what I've seen is the ability to bring people together to work together and enjoy that process.
What'd you get from your mom?
Mom was somebody who wasn't overly demanding, a very thoughtful, intellectual person who could dialogue with anyone, and she does have respect for everyone for their strengths and weaknesses, would not push me. She would suggest to enjoy the journey of life and find things that you like to do.
What's that have to do with you building these 6 businesses?
Yeah, well, I really like doing it. It's something that I enjoy. I don't find work as a 4-letter word that some people I feel. I always tell them when I hear that, I think you need to find something else.
Jeffrey?
Steve, your dad traveled a lot from work, with work, and but he was also an adventurer. You mentioned he was a hunter. You really looked up to your dad. Tell us what you take to work every day from your dad. You learn from him.
Just a person who was true to his heart and always did the right thing, even though it may not be the best sort of, let's say, political situation. He did the right thing for people, all the way to the point to when he passed away, which was actually fairly early. But I look at that, I remember the times when I'm with him and all the things he taught me, whether it be changing the oil in the car or going hunting with him. I was never really a big hunter, but I enjoyed being with him and I enjoyed the experience.
You mentioned your mom's still around. She's actually traveling today.
Mom's 83. She's a world masters swimmer record holder. She's in Norway.
How does she feel about your success? Has she talked to you about?
She's just a proud mom, I would say.
Shannon?
Earlier when you were talking about moving as a child, you said you enjoyed the fun of it. What did you mean by that?
Well, it's an experience, right? I mean, you get to go to Disney World, that's kind of fun. And if somebody says, hey, we're going to Italy, well, that's just a different Disney World, right? Just a different experience in life.
Mm-hmm. Stephen?
Steve, you seem to have this idea of being a free spirit. How do you pass that along to the companies and leaders that you work with now?
I just try to be supportive. I think if you recognize the value that people bring to the table and respect that, and then help support people for where their weaknesses or where their development needs are, it just seems to work.
Steve, during the break, I asked you if you had any kids, and you lit up like a Christmas tree and couldn't wait to tell me about your kids and their success. And I'm just curious, what have you learned being a dad and raising three kids?
It takes a lot of work.
And how is being a dad like being a CEO?
Yeah, it's the same as being a family is a family, whether it's a company family or your immediate family. And I think it's really important to just provide leadership to them and give them guidance that helps them find their own path.
And when I look at what you told me about your kids, Notre Dame, NASCAR driver, it sounds like you did a pretty good job raising these kids in the right way.
I have a wonderful wife. I met my wife in high school. When the day I met her, I said I could marry that woman, but I would not be ready.
Whoa. How young were you when you met your wife?
I was 17.
And you thought she was, what, give me that again?
Well, she was beautiful, and she was smart, and she was a year older than I was.
So you knew you wanted to marry her?
I thought about it the moment I saw her. Sort of love at first sight, I got to say. I know that sounds kind of silly, but it's real. And then I went to a party with her. She asked me for directions. I met her at a red light. She needed directions to a home.
All right, so hold on for a second here.
Yeah.
So basically, you have a good feel for people when you meet them. You have a good feel for chemistry, don't you?
Maybe that's a gift.
Uh-huh. Is that a gift in terms of helping pick your teammates? Is that one of the reasons you've been successful?
I think so.
What do you mean?
People are a critical factor to building entities or companies and doing anything. And I think understanding the puzzle that's in front of you and how that's filled with the right people and the right means, the skill set, and the behavior set.
How young were you when that began to show up 8 to 14? And give us an example.
I think my first job was I had a paper route, 2 of them, and then a couple years after that I ended up having to be the drop captain, which was great because I made more money doing that, and then I already had my team.
Wow, so implicitly you're looking at the business model and the team at the same time, aren't you?
I think so. I mean, maybe it was just, I'm not sure how intentional it was, but it just happened.
It just happened that you have that ability to see the big picture at all times, looking at the people as well and where people fit. You have a natural clue for that, don't you?
Maybe that is part of the success model. I think it's always about the people, that's for sure.
Peter?
Steve, you have a very expansive, kind of opportunistic attitude about life and business in general. I understand one of your hobbies is auto racing. What goes through your mind behind the wheel of a race car?
It is so. I've been a sailor, and I'm now a retired racer. But I think in either of those scenarios, I don't think about anything else. It actually removes the work world, those concerns that I always have, or when I'm constantly thinking about what's happening next. And behind the wheel, you're 100% focused.
Is that like business?
Yes. But yes, it is like business. You are 100% focused, but the alternate world of it behind a race car is just a different energy, a different excitement, a different drive.
So this earlier we were speaking about the fact you have how many children? How many kids?
3.
What have you learned from your kids that has anything to do that taught you about business?
What did I learn from my kids about business? It's the same. It's all about finding the skills that the individuals have and nurturing those. And for my children, they each have their own skill set. They're all different, as we all know. They're never the same, came from the same parents, but I think they all have the same honesty and integrity, and that's something I think that as parents we teach them, but I think they have their own drives and their own path in life, just as I have, and supporting that is just important to me, and I think it's the same inside a corporation. I think the people you have a life, have an interest, and they have a direction they want. Trying to support and nurture that, it's very similar.
Jeffrey?
What's your wife's name, Steve?
Lisa.
How has Lisa supported you in your career?
She's just phenomenal because moved as a child, moved as an adult, worked in South America, lived in England, moved to Asia, the Philippines, and she went right along with me, and that's hugely valuable. And she reminds me that as much as the work that I enjoy doing is sort of it is an energy that I can't walk away from. It's what I love to do, but that also to make sure I balance that with my family and it is very important to me, and so she's always there helping me make that happen and make these journeys occur. Couldn't do it without her.
What's the website address for Nexception?
Nexception is nexception.com, nexeption.com.
And Mr. Chris Molyneux, what's the website address for Life Sciences Pennsylvania?
lifesciencespa.org.
Excellent. We've been speaking with Steve Tolman, managing member of Nexception and chairman of the board of Life Sciences Pennsylvania. Jeffrey, can you give us a rundown on who else we've had the opportunity opportunity of speaking with today?
What a great show. We started with Sue Dillon, co-founder, president, and CEO of Arrow Biotherapeutics, Joe Truitt, president and CEO of Cahill Pharmaceuticals, Greg Wujak, the CEO of Castle Creek Pharma, and just now Steve Tolman, managing director, managing member of Nexception.
I'd like to thank my co-hosts, including Chris Molyneux, Life Sciences PA, Peter Snelling, Merrill Lynch, Jeff Mack, and Shannon Lane, Newmark Knight Frank, Drew Hanlon, Creative, and Steve Ray for giving me a hand structuring the questions, hopefully providing our listening audience an educational and entertaining show. I'd like to thank our listening audience for listening, otherwise we wouldn't have a radio show. Don't forget to visit our website. It's executiveleadersradio.com to learn more about our executive leaders. That's executiveleadersradio.com. To learn more about our executive leaders, thank you for joining us today and have a nice day. Bye-bye.